My name is Allie, 38 years old, and right now I'm standing in my kitchen arranging roses for my husband Mark's 40th birthday party tonight. My hands won't stop trembling. Something feels wrong about the way he insisted on inviting all his colleagues, especially after how cruel his jokes about me have become lately. Our 13-year-old daughter Emma is helping me hang decorations, her eyes watching me with concern I shouldn't see in someone so young. Before I share what happened at that party, where are you watching from? Please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear how a birthday celebration became the night that changed everything. Our house in Westport, Connecticut, looked like something from a magazine that evening. The Tudor-style home with its manicured lawn and circular driveway had been our dream when we bought it 8 years ago. Back then, Mark would carry me across the threshold after every vacation, joking that we needed to practice for when we were old. Now I couldn't remember the last time he'd held my hand. I need you to understand what our life looked like before so you can grasp what we lost, or maybe what I thought we had. 15 years ago, I was a rising star at a Manhattan marketing firm landing pharmaceutical campaigns that put me on industry watch lists. Mark was a law school graduate with ambitious eyes and a smile that made me forget my own name. We met at a charity gala my firm was sponsoring. He spent the entire night making me laugh, ignoring the senior partners he'd come to network with. 3 years later, we married at the Rainbow Room with 200 guests and a string quartet playing our song. I wore my mother's pearls and a dress that cost more than my first car. Mark cried when he saw me walking down the aisle. His vows included a promise to make me smile every single day for the rest of our lives. When Emma came along 2 years after that, everything shifted. Mark was making decent money as an associate at Brennan Fitzgerald and Associates, but childcare in Connecticut cost more than our mortgage. We made the decision together, or at least I thought we did. I would scale back to consulting work, take care of Emma, support his career climb. He promised it was temporary just until he made partner. I threw myself into being the perfect corporate wife and mother. I learned to host dinner parties for 20 with 2 days' notice. I memorized the names of every partner's spouse and their children's colleges. I volunteered at Emma's school, ran the PTA fundraiser that raised $40,000 for new computers, coached her debate team to state finals. Meanwhile, Mark climbed. Associate to senior associate to junior partner. Each promotion came with longer hours, weekend conferences, client dinners that somehow never included spouses. I told myself this was building our future. Emma needed college funds. We wanted to travel when Mark retired early. Emma grew into this remarkable human being while her father was at the office. She made honor roll every semester, played violin in the youth orchestra, captained her middle school debate team. She had my stubborn streak and what I thought were Mark's analytical skills. Teachers called her an old soul. I just saw my baby girl trying to be perfect enough to get her father's attention. The changes started 3 months ago. Mark made managing partner the youngest in the firm's history at 39. The celebration dinner was at Le Bernardin in the city. He invited 12 people from his office. I found out about it from his secretary when she called to confirm his reservation. That night he came home with a Rolex I'd never seen before, clothes that still had Barney's tags in the pocket, and cologne that wasn't the Tom Ford I'd bought him for Christmas. He stood in our bedroom doorway like a stranger, looking at me with this expression I couldn't read. The next morning he announced he'd joined Equinox, the luxury gym downtown. Said he needed to look the part now, whatever that meant. The man who hadn't exercised since his law school basketball days was suddenly concerned about his image. He hired a personal shopper at Nordstrom, started getting his hair cut at some salon in the city that cost $300. But it was the comments that really marked the change. Little things at first. A joke about my yoga pants at breakfast. A suggestion that I might want to color my hair, hide the gray. A comment about how the other partners' wives all had personal trainers. He'd pat my stomach when we passed in the hallway, not affectionately, but like he was checking something. The firm hired a new executive assistant for him named Brittany. 26 years old, fresh from NYU with an MBA, and ambitions that sparkled in her green eyes. Mark mentioned her constantly. Brittany's ideas for restructuring the filing system. Brittany's connections from her internship at Goldman. Brittany's marathon training schedule. I started noticing things. Late nights that didn't generate billable hours. Weekend golf games with no one I could verify. Charges on our credit card for restaurants I'd never been to, always justified as client development. His phone, which used to sit carelessly on counters, now never left his pocket. When it buzzed at dinner, he'd check it with this little smile that used to be mine. 2 weeks before his 40th birthday, Mark informed me, not asked, but informed me that he wanted a proper party. Not some family gathering, but an event. His colleagues needed to see him as management material for the senior partner track. We needed to project success stability, the right image. I spent 14 days planning that party like it was a state dinner. Catered by his favorite steakhouse and open bar with top-shelf everything, a cake from the French bakery that required ordering 3 weeks ahead. I hired a photographer, arranged for valet parking, even had the house professionally cleaned twice. The guest list read like a who's who of Connecticut legal circles. 3 senior partners and their wives, 6 junior partners, a handful of associates he mentored, plus family and what remained of our mutual friends. 43 people who would judge every detail from the wine selection to the bathroom hand towels. Mark had specific requirements. The good china, not the everyday plates. Classical music, not the jazz I preferred. Cocktails at 6:30, sharp dinner at 7:30, toasts at 8:45. He handed me a dress 2 days before, a black cocktail number with a neckline meant for someone Emma's age, not mine. When I suggested it might be too young for me, he laughed. Not his old warm laugh, but something sharp and mean. Said maybe if I'd kept myself up better, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Said Brittany helped pick it out, she had excellent taste. Said I should be grateful he still cared enough to want me to look good. Emma heard that exchange. I found her afterward in her room working on something on her laptop she quickly minimized. She hugged me longer than usual that night, told me I was beautiful, that Dad didn't deserve me. I thought she was just being a protective daughter. I had no idea she was planning something. The morning of the party, I woke to find Mark already gone. A text said he had errands to run, would be back by 5. Emma helped me all day, arranging flowers, setting up the bar, checking every detail twice. She kept asking if I was okay, if I was sure I wanted to do this. I told her it was just a party, we'd survived dozens of them. She looked at me with eyes too knowing for 13 and said sometimes surviving wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to fight back. I thought she meant standing up to her father about the dress. I wore it anyway, adding a cardigan that he'd probably hate, but made me feel less exposed. By 5:30 the caterers were set up, the house gleamed, and I'd managed to wrestle my hair into something resembling elegance. Emma wore the navy dress we'd bought for her spring concert, looking older than her years. Mark arrived home at 5:45, barely glancing at all our work before disappearing to shower and change. The first guests arrived precisely at 6:30. Harold and Dorothy, Mark's parents, drove down from Boston in their Lexus. His father already 3 bourbons into the evening from their country club lunch. Dorothy air-kissed my cheek, her eyes doing that scan, mothers-in-law perfect over decades, checking for weight gain, gray hair, signs of aging that might embarrass their precious son. Jennifer. My younger sister arrived next with her husband Tom. She took one look at my dress, the forced smile on my face, and pulled me into the kitchen. Asked if I was okay. Really okay. Not the brave face I showed everyone. I told her to stop worrying, that Mark was just stressed from the promotion. She didn't buy it, but the doorbell rang before she could press further. Mark's colleagues arrived in a parade of German cars and carefully selected wines. Mr. Davidson, the senior partner who'd mentored Mark, brought a bottle of 25-year-old Macallan. Mrs. Davidson, a former federal judge, squeezed my hand and whispered that I should call her if I ever needed anything. Strange thing to say at a birthday party, but her eyes suggested she knew something I didn't. The junior partners came with their wives, women who lunched at the country club, and competed over whose children got into better colleges. They complimented the flowers, the food, the house, all while their eyes cataloged every detail to dissect later over martinis. Ryan arrived with his latest girlfriend, a brunette whose name I didn't catch, because Mark immediately pulled him away for drinks. They'd been roommates at Cornell, best man at each other's weddings, though Ryan was on his third marriage now. He had that divorced man energy, trying too hard to seem young, laughing too loud at his own jokes. Then Brittany walked in. She wore a red dress that cost more than most people's rent, her hair professionally blown out makeup that belonged on a magazine cover. She carried a gift wrapped in silver paper with an elaborate bow, handing it to Mark with both hands like an offering. He lit up like Times Square, abandoning the conversation with Ryan to greet her. The hug lasted too long. His hand on her lower back as he guided her to the bar, introducing her to people like she was visiting royalty. My executive assistant, he said, couldn't run the office without her. She laughed, touching his arm, saying he was too kind, that she learned everything from him. Jennifer appeared at my elbow, watching them with narrowed eyes. Tom stood on my other side, his jaw tight. Even Harold, halfway through bourbon number 4, noticed something off about the dynamic. Dorothy busied herself examining the photographs on the mantel, lips pursed like she'd tasted something sour. Emma stayed close to me during cocktail hour, playing perfect hostess's daughter, passing appetizers, refilling drinks. But her eyes tracked her father and Brittany around the room like a hawk watching prey. When Brittany laughed at another of Mark's stories, her hand on his forearm, Emma's grip on the serving tray went white-knuckled. At 7:30 sharp, I announced dinner. Mark had arranged the seating naturally. He placed himself at the head of the table with Brittany to his right, claiming she needed to know the partners better for work. I sat at the opposite end like we were strangers who happened to share a mortgage. Emma sat beside me, Jennifer on my other side, a small army of support I didn't know I'd need. The dinner conversation flowed with practiced ease. Legal war stories, market predictions, children's accomplishments, vacation plans to places that required trust funds. Mark held court, regaling everyone with his latest courtroom victory, a $50 million settlement that made headlines in the Connecticut Law Tribune. Through the salad course, he was charming, Mark, the one who'd won me over 15 years ago, witty, intelligent, commanding the room's attention with natural charisma. Brittany hung on every word, gasping at the right moments, asking questions that let him expand on his brilliance. During the main course, something shifted. Maybe it was the wine 3 bottles in, or maybe it was Brittany's increasingly obvious attention. Mark started telling stories I'd never heard before, or versions twisted from reality. How he'd built his career from nothing, no help from anyone, pure determination and talent. No mention of my father's connection getting him the initial interview at Brennan. No mention of me editing his briefs those first years, catching errors that would have destroyed his reputation. No mention of the dinners I'd hosted for partners, the social capital I'd spent making him look like management material. Mr. Davidson cleared his throat when Mark claimed he'd won the Henderson case single-handedly. Everyone knew Davidson had saved that disaster. Mrs. Davidson studied her wine glass like it held the secrets of the universe. The other partners exchanged glances, the kind that said they were reassessing their golden boy. Then came the toasts. Ryan went first, telling embarrassing stories from Cornell, the kind that were funny because they happened 20 years ago. Mark's college girlfriends, his failed attempt at law. Review the time he got locked out of the library in his boxers. Everyone laughed, even Mark, though his smile had edges. Harold stood next, weaving, slightly raising his glass to his successful son. Pride of the family, he slurred, worth all those tuition payments. Dorothy tugged his sleeve until he sat down, her face a mask of proper Connecticut composure, hiding decades of practice managing his drinking. Then Mark stood. He tapped his knife against his glass, waiting for silence with the timing of someone who knew how to work a room. Thanked everyone for coming, for celebrating this milestone. 40 years old. Managing partner, living the American dream. He'd achieved everything he'd planned by this age, maybe more. He went around the table, acknowledging each person with practiced precision. Mr. Davidson for his mentorship, the partners for their support, Ryan for his loyalty, his parents for their sacrifice, Brittany for her invaluable assistance, lingering on her contribution while she blushed prettily. Then, almost as an afterthought, he looked down the table at me. And of course, he said, my wife. For being here. That was it. For being here. Like I was furniture that came with the house. Jennifer's hand found mine under the table. Emma went rigid beside me. Tom coughed into his napkin. The silence stretched until someone, I think Mrs. Davidson, started clapping politely, and everyone joined in because that's what you do at birthday parties when toasts end badly. We moved to the living room for dessert and coffee. The cake was perfect naturally, 3 layers of chocolate ganache with 40 gold candles that cost more than they should have. Everyone sang while Mark made a show of struggling to blow them all out. Brittany helpfully leaning in to assist her hair brushing his shoulder. That's when Mark decided to do what he called a roast. He started harmlessly enough, standing by the fireplace with fresh bourbon in hand, working through self-deprecating jokes about turning 40. The reading glasses he now needed for contracts. The gray creeping into his temples, the way his knees cracked during his attempted gym sessions. People laughed genuinely. The tension from dinner easing slightly. Then his eyes found me across the room, and something cruel sparked in them. "You all know my beautiful wife, Allie." He began gesturing toward me with his glass. "We've been married 15 years, can you believe it? 15 years. That's longer than some murders get in prison." Nervous laughter rippled through the room. Jennifer's hand tightened on her wine glass. Tom shifted forward in his chair like he might need to intervene. Emma had gone pale, her dessert untouched. But seriously, Mark continued. Allie was quite the catch back in the day. He pulled out his phone, connecting it to the smart TV we'd installed last year. "Let me show you what I managed to land in 2009. Photos from our dating days filled the screen. Me at 23, laughing at some rooftop bar in Manhattan, wearing a dress I couldn't fit one leg into now. Our trip to Cabo, me in a bikini that Emma would probably wear today. The company Christmas party where I'd won the award for highest billing, looking confident and untouchable in a power suit that had lived in donation bags for a decade. Look at that body," Mark said, whistling low. "That skin. That energy. I mean, wow, right? That's what I married, folks. That's what I signed up for." The room had gone silent except for the coffee maker gurgling in the kitchen. Harold studied his shoes. Dorothy's mouth had formed a thin line that meant someone would pay later. Mr. Davidson looked like he was witnessing a car accident in slow motion. "Now," Mark said, clicking to recent photos from his phone. "Let's see the updated model." There I was at last month's school fundraiser, exhausted after organizing the entire event, wearing a dress that accommodated the stress weight I'd gained. At Emma's concert, no makeup because I'd come straight from handling a plumbing disaster. Last weekend's grocery run in the yoga pants he hated, hair in a messy bun, looking exactly like what I was, a tired 38-year-old mother. Bit of a downgrade, wouldn't you say? He laughed at his own joke, the sound sharp and ugly. Like one of those car commercials where they show you the new model versus what's on the lot after 15 years. "Depreciation's a real thing, folks." Someone gasped. I think it was Mrs. Davidson. Or maybe Jennifer. My ears were ringing too loud to tell. Emma stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. But I caught her wrist, shaking my head slightly. "Not yet, baby. Let him finish destroying himself." But Mark wasn't done. He pulled out our wedding photo, the one from our mantel, holding it up like evidence in court. "Look at this bride. Size 4 dress, 120 pounds, soaking wet. That dress is in our attic, and I kid you not. Allie can't get it past her thighs now. We tried last anniversary as a joke." Well, I was joking. She cried for an hour. That was a lie. We hadn't tried anything last anniversary. He'd forgotten it entirely, claimed a client emergency when I'd made reservations at our old favorite restaurant. I'd eaten alone at our kitchen island, watching Netflix and finishing a bottle of wine meant for 2. "You know what they say?" Mark continued, really warming to his theme. "Now women gain a pound for every year of marriage. Allie's an overachiever. She went for 2 pounds a year. Maybe 3. Haven't done the exact math, but the evidence speaks for itself." He gestured at me with his glass bourbon sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "At least I know she'll never leave me. Who else would want her now? I mean, look at the options out there." He glanced at Brittany, who had the decency to look uncomfortable. Fresh talent entering the market every day. But hey, Allie's got job security. Tenure, you might say. Ryan tried to interrupt with a joke about his own weight gain, but Mark waved him off. The thing is, he said men age like wine. Women age like milk. It's not personal, it's just biology. I've got colleagues taking second wives upgrading to newer models. Brad from accounting just married a 28-year-old yoga instructor. His first wife looks like Allie, actually. Maybe it's something in the Connecticut water. Jennifer started to stand, her face flushed with rage. Tom pulled her back down, whispering urgently in her ear. Harold tried to change the subject, something about the Patriots season, but Mark was in full flow now, unstoppable, destroying 15 years of marriage in front of everyone who mattered in our social circle. I could get a younger model too, he mused, pretending to think about it. Trade in the minivan for a sports car, if you know what I mean. But then who would handle Emma's school stuff? Who would remember the dry cleaning? Who would keep this house running while I'm building my empire? He raised his glass in mock salute to me. So here's to my wife for being here, for keeping the home fires burning while everything else goes cold. For being reliable if nothing else. Like a good appliance, not pretty anymore, but still functional. Brittany giggled. She tried to cover it with her hand, but the sound had already escaped, tinkling through the silent room like broken glass. That single giggle gave Mark permission to continue, validation that someone found his cruelty entertaining. You know the funniest part, Mark said, and I knew whatever came next would be the worst of it. Allie still tries sometimes. The new face cream that costs more than groceries. The shapewear that leaves marks on her skin. The salon appointments trying to look like she did when Clinton was president. It's adorable, really. Like watching your grandmother try to use Instagram. That's when Emma took the microphone. She moved with the quiet confidence I'd seen her display in debate competitions, the kind that made judges lean forward in their seats. The karaoke microphone from the party supplies I'd bought but never planned to use was suddenly in her 13-year-old hands, and she was connecting her phone to the television with movements too smooth to be spontaneous. Dad. She said, her voice clear and steady through the speakers, I have something special for your 40th birthday. A presentation about truth and consequences. Mark's face shifted from amused to uncertain. He knew Emma's capabilities, had bragged about them enough at office parties. But this was his daughter, Daddy's little girl, who still let him help with her math homework sometimes. He smiled indulgently, waiting for what he assumed would be embarrassing childhood photos or a sentimental video. The first slide appeared. Screenshots of text messages, the sender clearly marked as Mark Thompson, the recipient saved as B, with a heart emoji. Cannot wait to see you tonight, baby. My wife thinks I'm at the Peterson deposition. You looked incredible in that red dress yesterday. Keep wearing things like that. She doesn't understand me like you do. 15 years, and she still doesn't get what I need. The room collectively stopped breathing. Brittany's face drained of color, her hand flying to her mouth. Mark lunged toward Emma, but Tom stood up, all 6'3" of him, blocking the path. Harold grabbed Mark's arm, his own face purple with rage and shame. Emma clicked to the next slide with the composure of a seasoned prosecutor. Credit card statements appeared, highlighted charges at the Ritz-Carlton downtown, always on Tuesday afternoons, when Mark claimed to have client meetings. A receipt from Tiffany's for a tennis bracelet I'd never received, dated 2 weeks ago. Charges at restaurants I'd never been to, always for two. Always on nights he'd said he was working late. The third slide showed photos from Mark's cloud storage. The one he'd forgotten was linked to our family account. Mark and Brittany at a wine bar, her hand on his thigh. The two of them leaving the office together, his hand on her lower back. A selfie Brittany had taken in what was clearly Mark's car, wearing the tennis bracelet from Tiffany's. But Dad, Emma said, her voice never wavering, you were right about one thing. Mom has lost weight. 15 pounds, actually. She just stopped mentioning it because you never noticed. Too busy with your Tuesday meetings and weekend golf games that somehow never included your colleagues from the club. She clicked again. Mark's gym membership appeared, showing he'd scanned in exactly twice since joining 3 months ago. Both times were the first week before Brittany started. His golf club records showed no reservations, no tee times, no presence at all on the weekends he claimed to be there. Mom works part-time. Emma continued manages this entire house, raised me essentially alone, and still found time to lose weight and look amazing. You gained 10 pounds according to your last doctor's visit, which Mom scheduled and reminded you about 3 times. The only joke in this room is a man destroying his family for someone who'll leave him the second a richer option appears. She turned to address the room, making eye contact with each guest like I'd taught her for debate competitions. My mother is brilliant. She gave up a career where she was making more than Dad to raise me, because they decided together that family came first. She edited every brief that got him promoted. She hosted every dinner that impressed his bosses. She built the network that made him managing partner. Mrs. Davidson nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on Mark with disgust. Mr. Davidson had pulled out his phone, typing something with focused intensity. The other partners were exchanging glances, the kind that preceded emergency board meetings. And Brittany Emma looked directly at her now. You're 26 with an MBA from NYU. Is this really your 5-year plan, being the other woman for a married man who humiliates his wife at parties? You could run a company someday, but you're settling for sneaking around with someone who'll never leave his wife because he needs her more than he'll ever admit. Brittany stood abruptly, grabbing her purse, mumbling something about not feeling well. She practically ran to the door, her heels clicking against the hardwood like rapid gunfire. Mark called after her, actually took a step to follow before remembering his parents, his colleagues, his entire professional network watching him with revulsion. The best part? Emma said, saving her final slide. Mom doesn't even need you anymore. She landed 3 new consulting clients last month, big pharma companies who remembered her work from before. She's been saving money in her own account enough to pay for this house and my college tuition. She stayed because she loved you, because she believed in our family. But you just showed everyone here that you don't deserve that love. She set down the microphone, gently walked over to me, and took my hand. Her fingers were steady, warm, anchoring me to the moment when I felt like I might float away from shock. The room erupted. Dorothy slapped Mark across the face, the crack echoing through the room. Harold grabbed his son by the collar, dragging him toward the door while hissing things about disappointment and shame. The partners were already leaving Mr. Davidson, pausing only to hand me his business card, writing his personal cell phone on the back. Jennifer wrapped me in a hug while Tom positioned himself between us and Mark, who was now trying to explain, to justify, to minimize what everyone had just seen. His words tumbled over each other, desperate and pathetic. It wasn't what it looked like. Emma didn't understand adult relationships. Allie had driven him to it. The stress of the promotion, midlife crisis, anything but accountability. I stood up slowly, my daughter's hand still in mine, and found my voice for the first time that evening. The house went quiet, everyone turning to hear what the humiliated wife would say. I looked at Mark, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for the first time in years. Not the successful lawyer, not the providing husband, but a small, insecure man who needed to diminish others to feel big. Mark, I said, my voice carrying the kind of authority I'd forgotten I possessed. You have 1 hour to pack a bag and leave this house. Don't take anything that requires negotiation. Your lawyer can contact mine about the rest. He laughed, bitter and disbelieving. My lawyer. You don't have a lawyer? Michael's already on his way, I replied. Jennifer had texted my brother, the divorce attorney who'd handled 3 of the ugliest splits in Connecticut last year. He'll be here before your hour is up. And Mark, that video Emma showed, that's just what she found. Imagine what a forensic accountant will discover. His face went white. The firm had a morality clause, something about behavior unbecoming of a managing partner. Affairs with subordinates definitely qualified. The financial impropriety of using company cards for personal expenses would be the nail in his professional coffin. The room emptied quickly after that. Colleagues murmured excuses about early mornings and babysitters. Family members chose sides, with their feet hugging me and Emma while avoiding Mark entirely. Within 20 minutes, only Jennifer, Tom, Emma, and I remained in the house that had hosted its last party. Mark packed upstairs, we could hear drawers slamming, hangers rattling. Emma sat beside me on the couch, her head on my shoulder, finally allowing herself to be 13 again. Jennifer cleaned up not because it needed doing, but because she needed to move. Tom stood guard at the stairs, making sure Mark didn't try to take anything he shouldn't. When Mark finally came down with his suitcase, he looked deflated, older than 40, like someone had let all the air out of his ego. He tried one more time, standing in the doorway of the home we'd built together. "Allie, please. We can work this out. Couples therapy. Whatever you want." I stood up, walked to him with the dignity he'd tried to strip away, and said the words I'd been rehearsing in my head for 3 months without realizing it. "I want a divorce. I want you to leave. I want to never have to make myself smaller so you can feel bigger. And Mark, that dress you bought me, I'm burning it tomorrow." He left. No dramatic exit, no slamming door, just the quiet click of a marriage ending. Emma and I stood at the window watching his Tesla disappear down the driveway. She squeezed my hand 3 times, our secret code for "I love you" since she was little. "Mom," she said quietly, "I'm sorry I had to do that. But he was hurting you, and someone had to stop it." I turned to my remarkable daughter, this young woman who'd defended me with more courage than I'd shown for myself in years. "How long have you known?" 3 months, she admitted. "Since he got promoted." His iPad synchronized with the family account when he updated it. He forgot to turn off message sharing. I saw everything. The texts, the photos, the receipts. I kept copies of everything because I knew someday he'd go too far. Jennifer joined us at the window, wrapping her arms around both of us. Tom brought me a glass of wine, and Emma hot chocolate, and we sat in the living room until midnight, not talking about Mark or the party or the future, just being together in the ruins of what had been. The next morning arrived with brutal clarity, sunlight streaming through windows I'd forgotten to close the curtains on. My phone showed 43 missed calls from Mark, 22 text messages ranging from apologetic to angry to desperate, and 1 voicemail from Mr. Davidson asking me to call him at my earliest convenience. Emma made breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, insisting I needed to eat. Jennifer had stayed the night in the guest room and emerged looking ready for war. Her laptop already open, researching divorce lawyers even though Michael was on his way. Tom had gone home, but promised to return if needed, his protective presence a comfort I hadn't expected. I called Mr. Davidson back first. His voice was professionally sympathetic but firm. The firm would be conducting an investigation into Mark's conduct. Using company resources for personal relationships was grounds for immediate suspension. The financial irregularities Emma had exposed would trigger a full audit. Did I have copies of everything Emma had shown? Of course I did. My daughter had created a file titled Evidence and shared it with me, Jennifer, and Michael before the party even ended. Michael arrived at noon looking every inch the shark lawyer in his weekend casual wear. He'd driven up from the city, canceling his golf game because family came first. He set up in Mark's former home office, irony not lost on anyone, and began building the case that would dismantle my marriage properly. The financial picture was worse than Emma had discovered. Mark had opened credit cards I didn't know about, taken loans against his 401k, moved money from our joint savings into accounts only in his name. The Tiffany bracelet was just the beginning. There were charges for weekend trips to Miami, Las Vegas, even Montreal, all while I thought he was at conferences or visiting clients. Michael whistled low when he found the second apartment lease. A 1-bedroom in Stamford, signed 2 months ago, $15,000 in deposits and furniture charges. The utilities were in Brittany's name, but the payments came from Mark's hidden account. He'd been planning his exit while humiliating me for staying. The doorbell rang constantly that first day. Flowers from Mrs. Davidson with a note saying she'd always admired my strength. A fruit basket from 3 of the junior partners' wives with a card suggesting lunch when I was ready. Harold and Dorothy came by, Dorothy in tears. Harold stone-faced and ashamed, both apologizing for raising a son capable of such cruelty. They promised their support in the divorce, financial, and otherwise, wanting to make things right for Emma's sake. Mark's secretary called professionally, informing me that his access to the office had been suspended pending investigation. His company car would need to be returned. His corporate credit cards were frozen. She spoke with the kind of barely contained satisfaction that suggested she'd been waiting for this day, another woman who'd watched him diminish others from her desk outside his office. Emma spent the day with her best friend Sophie, whose mother had been at the party. She came home that evening with stories of how the news had already spread through their social circle. 3 other mothers had reached out to Sophie's mom, sharing their own suspicions about Mark's behavior. Apparently, his contempt for me hadn't been as private as he'd thought. That night, lying in bed alone but not lonely for the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. 15 years of marriage reduced to a cruel comedy routine. The man who'd promised to make me smile every day had tried to break me for sport. But he'd failed to account for 2 things my resilience forged through years of managing everything while he took credit, and our daughter's fierce love stronger than his casual cruelty. The divorce proceedings moved with surprising speed. Mark hired an aggressive lawyer who tried to claim I'd been planning this, that Emma and I had conspired to humiliate him for financial gain. Michael laughed at that, presenting evidence of Mark's financial deception that made my brother whistle appreciatively. The hidden accounts, the secret apartment, the credit cards, the loans, it painted a picture of a man who'd been planning to leave but wanted to destroy me first. The firm's investigation concluded within 2 weeks. Mark was terminated for cause, no severance, no references, his reputation in Connecticut legal circles destroyed. Brittany had already resigned, moved back to her parents' house on Long Island, her social media scrubbed of any trace of her time at the firm. Someone sent me screenshots of her LinkedIn where she'd already removed the position entirely, 6 months of her life erased. Mark fought the divorce at first, claiming the house was his because he'd paid the mortgage. Michael pointed out that I'd used my inheritance from my grandmother for the down payment that my consulting work had paid for Emma's education and activities that my unpaid labor as household manager, social secretary, and corporate wife had value the court would recognize. He tried to claim custody of Emma, arguing that I'd turned her against him. Emma herself wrote a letter to the judge, articulate and devastating, explaining that she'd discovered her father's affairs through his own carelessness, that she'd watched him diminish her mother for months, that she felt safer with me. The judge, a woman who'd seen enough of these cases, granted me full custody with supervised visitation for Mark if Emma agreed. 3 months after the party, the divorce was finalized. I got the house primary custody of Emma, half of all marital assets, including his 401k and alimony, that reflected my sacrifice of my career for his. Mark got his clothes, his car, and the freedom he'd apparently craved. He moved to Boston, joined a small firm doing insurance defense, a spectacular fall from managing partner at a prestigious firm. The transformation afterward surprised everyone, including me. Without the constant weight of Mark's criticism, I rediscovered parts of myself I'd buried under 15 years of trying to be the perfect corporate wife. The gym membership he'd mocked became my sanctuary, not for weight loss, but for strength. I could run 5 miles without stopping, lift weights that made me feel powerful, take yoga classes where I learned to breathe again. I returned to marketing full-time, not with a big firm, but as an independent consultant. 3 pharmaceutical companies remembered my work from before, hired me for campaigns that reminded me why I'd loved this career. My income within 6 months exceeded what I'd made before Emma was born, adjusted for inflation. The clients appreciated my maturity, my perspective, my refusal to play political games because I'd already survived worse. Emma thrived in the peace of our Mark-free home. Her grades, already excellent, became exceptional. She joined the mock trial team, channeling her experience into advocacy for others. Her violin playing, which had been mechanical and perfect, gained emotion and depth. She started therapy at her request, wanting to process everything properly, showing wisdom I hadn't possessed at 13. We redecorated the house together, removing all traces of Mark's traditional preferences. His dark leather furniture replaced with comfortable fabrics and jewel tones. His hunting prints swapped for local artists' work we chose together. His home office became Emma's music room, where she could practice without apology. The formal dining room, where he'd held court, became a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and reading nooks. Jennifer became my constant companion, our sisterhood strengthened by crisis. We took weekend trips to New York for Broadway shows Mark had called frivolous. We joined a book club full of divorced and widowed women who understood that sometimes losing someone who diminished you was actually winning. We laughed more in those months than I had in the last 5 years of marriage. The other changes were smaller, but significant. I stopped coloring my hair, letting the silver threads Mark had mocked become streaks I wore with pride. I donated all the shapewear, the uncomfortable heels, the clothes chosen to minimize and apologize for my existence. My new wardrobe consisted of things that made me feel confident and comfortable, professional when needed, casual when not always authentically mine. Men started noticing me. Not the desperate attention of married men looking for affairs, but genuine interest from divorced fathers. At Emma's events, single professionals at industry conferences, the architect overseeing our kitchen renovation. I wasn't ready yet, might not be for a while, but knowing I could be desired again, that Mark's assessment of my worth had been wrong, helped heal wounds I didn't know were still bleeding. Dorothy stayed in touch, calling weekly to check on Emma and me. She'd left Harold temporarily, she claimed, but the separation stretched into months. She took an apartment in Hartford, started volunteering at a women's shelter, began therapy for the first time at 71. She told me once that watching her son destroy his marriage had forced her to examine her own, and she hadn't liked what she found. The gossip circuit, which I dreaded, became an unexpected source of support. The party story had spread through Connecticut's social network like wildfire. But instead of judgment, I found solidarity. Women approached me at the grocery store, the gym, school events, sharing their own stories of survival. Mark became a cautionary tale told at wine nights and book clubs. The man who destroyed his perfect life for an affair with someone who didn't even fight for him. 6 months after the divorce, I received an unexpected email from Brittany. A long, thoughtful apology that seemed genuine in its shame and self-reflection. She'd been in therapy working through why she'd pursued married men, what validation she'd been seeking in their attention. She took responsibility for her choices while acknowledging Mark's manipulation. She was back in school getting her doctorate in business planning to teach, rather than climb corporate ladders. I didn't respond, but I didn't delete it either. Sometimes growth comes from the strangest places. Mark tried to reconnect with Emma for her 14th birthday. Sent an expensive gift, a new iPhone with unlimited everything, the kind of grand gesture he'd always substituted for presents. Emma donated it to her school's technology drive for underprivileged students, using her babysitting money to buy herself a refurbished model instead. She texted him a polite thank you and a picture of the donation receipt, a masterclass in civil devastation. He showed up at her spring concert uninvited, sitting in the back row like a stranger. Emma saw him, but didn't acknowledge his presence, playing her solo with a passion that brought tears to my eyes. Afterward, when he approached us in the lobby, she spoke to him with the same polite distance she'd use for a teacher she didn't particularly like. The man who'd been her hero was now just someone she used to know. The financial recovery took planning but wasn't impossible. The alimony covered the mortgage and utilities, my consulting work handled everything else. I was careful with money in a way Mark never had been, remembering my grandmother's Depression-era wisdom about saving for storms even when the sun was shining. Emma's college fund, which Mark had threatened to drain for his defense, was protected by the divorce settlement, growing steadily toward her dreams. A year after the party, Emma and I took a vacation to Italy, something I'd always wanted to do but Mark had called cliché. We spent 2 weeks in Tuscany taking cooking classes, visiting vineyards, exploring hill towns without agenda or timeline. Emma practiced her Italian with locals who charmed her with their patience. I remembered what it felt like to be curious about the world instead of managing someone else's ambitions. On our last night in Florence, sitting at a restaurant overlooking the Arno, Emma raised her glass of lemonade to toast. To us, she said, to surviving and thriving. To you for being strong enough to leave. To me for being brave enough to speak. To our future without anyone who makes us feel small. Looking back now, 18 months after that horrible, wonderful night, I see the party differently. Not as the worst day of my life, but as the day my daughter saved me from slowly disappearing. Each cruel word Mark spoke had been stripping away pieces of my identity so gradually I hadn't noticed how little was left. Emma's courage in exposing him wasn't just about revealing his affair, it was about showing me that I deserved better than survival. The woman I am now wouldn't recognize the woman who stood in that kitchen, hands trembling while arranging roses for a man who'd forgotten how to see her. This woman runs her own business, makes her own decisions, laughs without calculating whether it's too loud. This woman teaches her daughter through example that love shouldn't require you to shrink yourself to fit someone else's comfort. Mark sends checks and occasional emails attempting reconciliation. He's dating someone age-appropriate now, a lawyer from his new firm who doesn't know his history. Emma heard through the teenage gossip network that he tells people his ex-wife had a breakdown, that she turned his daughter against him, that he was the victim of a vindictive divorce. The people who matter know the truth. The ones who believe him wouldn't have enriched our lives anyway. Emma's relationship with the truth has become something beautiful to witness. She speaks up in class when she disagrees, challenges authority when it's wrong, stands up for classmates who are being diminished. Her college essay about the party, about choosing truth over comfort, about the price and power of speaking up got her early admission to 3 Ivy League schools. She chose Yale, close enough to visit, but far enough to be her own person. We still live in the same house, but it's unrecognizable from the museum of Mark's success it used to be. Every room tells our story. Now filled with photos from our travels, Emma's awards and certificates, my grandmother's china finally removed from storage and used daily. The garden I'd never had time for blooms with vegetables and flowers chosen for joy rather than propriety. Sometimes I dream about that party, but they're not nightmares anymore. In the dreams, I'm watching from outside myself, seeing a woman discover she's stronger than she knew, a daughter braver than she should have to be, a room full of witnesses to the exact moment a marriage revealed itself as already over. I wake from these dreams, not sad but grateful, understanding that sometimes destruction is just creation wearing a disguise. The profound lesson isn't just about leaving toxic relationships or standing up to bullies or protecting your children from harmful parents. It's about the insidious nature of gradual erosion, how criticism disguised as jokes can hollow you out so slowly you don't notice you're disappearing. It's about teaching our daughters that love doesn't mean tolerating disrespect, that marriage isn't martyrdom, that staying together for the children only teaches those children to accept their own future diminishment. But mostly it's about the unexpected gifts wrapped in devastating packages. Mark's cruelty gave me freedom. His public humiliation became my public vindication. His affair freed me from a marriage that had been dying so slowly I'd mistaken it for aging. His inability to see my worth allowed me to finally see it myself, reflected not in his eyes, but in my daughter's fierce protection, my sister's steady support, my own surviving spirit. Now when I look in the mirror, I don't see the woman Mark mocked at his 40th birthday party. I don't see the 23-year-old he'd married and mourned. I see a 40-year-old woman with silver streaks and laugh lines, strong arms and clear eyes, who raised a daughter brave enough to expose the truth when it mattered most. I see someone who learned that the opposite of love isn't hate, but contempt, and that walking away from contempt is walking toward freedom. The last time I saw Mark was at Emma's high school graduation 6 months ago. He sat 10 rows behind us alone, watching his daughter give the valedictorian speech about integrity and courage. She thanked her mother for teaching her that speaking truth is more important than keeping peace. The applause was thunderous. Mark left before the reception, probably understanding finally that some things once broken can never be repaired, only released. That night at Emma's graduation party, filled with people who'd stood by us, who'd chosen sides when neutrality would have been easier, who'd helped us build this new life from the ashes of the old, I felt the last piece of healing click into place. Not because I'd forgiven Mark. Forgiveness isn't required for freedom, but because I'd finally forgiven myself for staying so long, for accepting so little, for teaching my daughter through my suffering instead of my strength. The party that was meant to celebrate Mark's success became the ceremony of his downfall, but more importantly, it became the moment my daughter and I chose ourselves. We chose truth over comfort, dignity over habit, futures over history. We chose to stop pretending that emotional cruelty was normal, that diminishment was love's tax, that staying together was more important than being whole. Now Emma's heading to Yale in 3 weeks, ready to change the world with her combination of brilliance and bravery. I'm expanding my consulting firm, hiring 2 young women who remind me of myself before I learn to make myself small. We're planning a month in Japan next summer after Emma's freshman year, a celebration of surviving and thriving and choosing joy over duty. Sometimes young women reach out to me through LinkedIn or Facebook, having heard the story through various networks, asking how to know when enough is enough, when criticism becomes cruelty, when it's time to leave. I tell them to listen to their bodies, which know before their minds admit it. I tell them to watch how their partners treat waitstaff, their mothers themselves, when they think no one's watching. But mostly I tell them this: if someone needs you to be smaller for them to feel big enough, they're already too small for you. The birthday party meant to humiliate me became my liberation ceremony. The daughter I'd protected became my protector. The marriage I'd fought to save revealed itself as not worth saving. And the woman who'd stood in that kitchen with trembling hands arranging roses for a man who couldn't see her anymore became someone who never trembles when she looks in the mirror now, because she finally sees herself clearly, completely, and finds herself absolutely beautiful. So I want to know, have you ever had someone stand up for you when you couldn't stand up for yourself? What would you have done if your child exposed a truth you were too afraid to reveal? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in unexpected places. And please share this with someone who might need to hear that leaving isn't losing, it's finally choosing to win. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, you deserve someone who helps you grow bigger, not someone who needs you to stay small. Until next time, choose truth, choose courage, and above all, choose yourself.